So to begin with, first of all, okay, imagine you wanted to make orange juice. So you get a bunch of apples, you put them in a blender, you press the button, and then afterward, you get the juice, you drink it, and you're like, this isn't orange juice, this isn't what I want. And suppose you go and you spend all your time trying to play with the different buttons on the blender. You take apart the motor of the blender, you clean the blender bowl. You spend all your time focusing on the blender, trying to get what you want. But as you know, if you don't go to the origin of the problem was you wanted orange juice, but you started with apples. So you will never get what you want if you don't go to the origin of the problem. And this is what we're going to do in this first part of the session. If we're going to talk about reparations for Afro-descendant people, Afro-descendant means your ancestor was taken against their will from their homeland, from their family, from their village, trafficked against their will across the Atlantic, and enslaved in the Americas. If we want to talk about reparations for Afro-descendant people, whether it's North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, we have to start at the origin. And sadly, as Carter G. Woodson taught us, most of us have been miseducated. We have never actually been taught the origin, how what we refer to as the transatlantic enslavement or trade started. We're going to go over that today. And then after, we're going to discuss the legal ramifications. They can be of great use to the reparations movement right there in Tulsa. Okay? Now, by a show of hands, how many people in the room are Afro-descendants? Raise your hands. You had an ancestor that was enslaved in the Americas. All right, keep your hands up. Now watch this. Keep your hand up if you can tell me, right, tell me the people that either your maternal or paternal lineage came from in Africa, or the language they spoke. Okay, if you know where or who they came from in Africa and what language they spoke, what we call mother tongue, keep your hand up. Okay, good. I see a few people with their hands up. If we were to have all 50 million African Americans in the room, it would only be, you can put your hands down now, it would only be a small percentage that could answer that question. If you haven't taken the African ancestry DNA test, or by some great oral history keeping in your family, more than 90% of us, more than 95%, probably about 99% of us, no longer can identify who we come from or our mother tongue. And that is where reparation starts. Because someone was taken from their family, from their village, from their culture, from their mother tongue, brought to the Americas, and through a violent manufacturing process, right, destroyed that identity. There's a word for that. It's called ethnocide. And if you can't identify those people, that mother tongue, that means you continue to suffer from that original crime today, which makes it an ongoing harm that requires reparations. Okay? Now, Vanessa, were you able to print out the handout that you had? Okay, so people have the handout. You have a diagram. It says the poison tree, right? And it says the legal doctrine, right? The fruit of the poisonous tree rule states that if the source of a legal action is illegal, everything that follows is also invalid or illegal. A criminal foundation cannot support a lawful structure. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to, as quickly as I can, go over what is called the poisoned root. All of this, how all of this started, and why it's important that everyone in the room, everyone in Oklahoma, everyone in the United States, everyone in the Americas, everyone in the world has to know the truth in order for us to move forward. So let me share my screen. Share screen. Here we go. All right. So let us start by looking at before the original crime, before the very first slave ship or military ship arrived in Africa, what was going on, especially in Europe. So we need to understand that from the 8th to the 11th century, there was a slave trade going on. So 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, for 5 centuries before our ancestors were invaded and attacked, there was a slave trade going on. And you can see it's going on in Europe. And you can see, right, that people were taken out of Africa through the Iberian Peninsula over here where Spain and Portugal is. And they were also taken out through what we call Egypt, okay, and taken through this route. At this time, there was a war going on between Christians and Muslims that engulfed the entire Mediterranean, Europe, North Africa, what we call the Middle East, okay? So at this time, there's already slavery. Now, let me show you this real quick. All right. Just so we can fully understand, this is from the ancient Middle Kingdom of Egypt, right? More than 10 centuries before what I was just talking about. That shows people, different colors, they come from different geographical locations, all taken as prisoners of war and forced to work, labor, sometimes in the military, sometimes in other efforts. So this practice of capturing people and enslaving them was going on for a long time before what we're going to talk about, how our ancestors arrived in the Americas. Okay? By the time we get to 1243 AD, Pope Innocent IV asked the question, is it licit, is it legal to invade the lands that infidels, right, people who are non-Christians, is it legal to invade the lands that they possess? And if it is legal, why? His answer was, there existed a temporal domain that was simultaneously autonomous yet subordinate. In spiritual matters, the Pope's authority prevailed, according to the Pope, according to the Catholic Church, since, according to their doctrine, all humans were of Christ, though not with the church. This resulted in a jurisdiction over 2 distinct flocks. This is the European Christian mind thinking back in 1243, that there was a jurisdiction consisting of Christians and one consisting of everyone else. So if you're not Christian, you're part of what they call the extra ecclesiam. Since the Pope's jurisdiction extended de jure, according to rightful entitlement or by claim, over the infidels or non-Christians, he, the Pope alone, could call for a Christian invasion of an infidel or non-Christian domain. Okay? To discard Christianity would mean that their dominion merely rested on the might of one particular lineage over another. What all of this means is that, according to European Christian thinking at this time, 1243, there had to be a just cause in order to go into non-Christian lands and invade them. And only the Pope could say if there was just cause or not. All right. Now, in Europe, at this time, just before they start coming to West Africa, first there's the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. It is estimated to have killed 30% to 60% of the European population. Then there was the White Hygiene Death. It was a bubonic plague pandemic that occurred in Europe from 1346 to 1353. It was one of the most fatal pandemics in human history. As many as 50 million people perished, perhaps 50% of Europe's 14th century population. Okay, how many people knew that? How many people were taught that the condition of Europe was pitiful, that their people were dying just before they came into Africa? Okay. At the same time, Mansa Musa had acquired a reputation, a European reputation, as the result of a spectacular pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, when he dazzled Cairo with its prodigious display of wealth and especially gold. So while Europe's population is decreasing, they're suffering poor hygiene, they're having plagues, right? They're dying of famine and poor hygiene. Their idea of Africa is, wow, these people, they're rich, they have splendor, they have gold. Mansa Musa came from here, and he traveled this route across Africa, across North Africa to Cairo, eventually went to Mecca with gold and guess what? Slaves. Now, at that time, there were already these trade routes in the Mediterranean. So it's not like European people were ignorant about Africa, its state, its condition, okay? There was a lot of knowledge on both sides. And meanwhile, they are already trading slaves. White slaves, European slaves, Middle Eastern slaves. It's mostly Christians enslaving Moors, Moors enslaving Christians, Christians enslaving Muslims, Muslims enslaving Christians, and both of them going into what we call Guinea, sub-Saharan Africa, where we were neither Christian nor Muslim. We had nothing to do with those foreign religions. And they would come and capture people and bring them on these trade routes, right? And bring them to the Mediterranean, okay? Now, by 1447, there's a book written by Antonius Malfante. He talks about on horseback going southward for 12 days to a place called the Tuat, right here. It's ruled by an oligarchy. Merchants enjoy very great security. There are many Jews who lead a good life here, for they are under the protection of the several rulers, each of whom defends his clients. Trade is in their hands. This locality is a mart of the country of the Moors. Gold is carried hither and brought by those who come up from the coast. This place is Tamenti, okay? So you have Tuat, you have all the way from North Africa, you're coming down, they come all the way down as far as here, okay? The gold fields are south of here, okay? There are many rich men here. In the lands of the blacks as well as here dwell the Philistines, the Tuareg, those are North Africans, who live like the Arabs in tents. They are without number and hold sway over the land. Great warriors, these people are continually at war amongst themselves. The states which are under their rule border upon the land of the blacks. So we're talking about non-black people. We're talking about brown people who are a mixture of North Africans and Europes. We're talking about Arab people, and we're talking about European people, all traveling these trade routes, going into the land where our black ancestors lived, who had nothing to do with this. Okay? There are a small number of whites, tawny Moors in Takeda. Takeda is right here. Look how far south that is. Okay? All of them in these great empires of Gao, Timbuktu, Guinea, which is where Guinea comes from, and Mali. All these are great cities, capitals of extensive lands and towns under their rule. These adhere to the law of Muhammad. So let's get it straight, okay? at this time in Europe, just before they start coming to the West Coast, there was already contact. In fact, they had already started taking slaves into Europe, right? They had Moorish slaves, they had Guinean slaves, they had Slavic, white European slaves that were living in Portugal and Spain and other places in the Mediterranean, okay? It's not like they told us, oh, one day they decided to go in boats and explore the ocean, and they just ended up on the west coast of Africa, and to their surprise, they found people living in huts and took them. No, they knew we had great cities. They knew about Mansa Musa. They knew that, we had villages and lived in huts, but we also had great cities, all right? Now, watch this. In 1415, the King of Portugal's brother, Prince Henry, decides to capture this city called Ceuta, which controls the trade in the Mediterranean. When Prince Henry conquers this city in 1415, he learns about all that I just told you about. He learns that if you go south past the desert, there is a lot of gold, and also there are slaves, okay? He learns about these trade routes. Now, if you look right here, the green, those are donkey and porter routes, okay? These are easy to traverse. But crossing the Sahara, only the camels could do that. And so those Tuaregs, those Moors, those mixed breed, part Arab, part Black, part European people, right, were controlling that trade, right? And these were the different capitals of that. Here you can see the gold. This is where the gold is. And they were trading salt and other things. All right. In 1420, Prince Henry gained appointment as the governor of the Military Order of Christ, the Portuguese successor to the Knights Templars, which had its headquarters at Tomar in central Portugal. Those of you who know the history of the Crusades, when you had the Christians fighting the Muslims from about the 10th century to the 13th century, right? During that period, traveling from Western Europe to the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, you had pilgrims, but they also had to move money. And in order to protect the pilgrims and the money, they developed a system of knights and orders that were part religious orders, part military orders. The most famous became Knights Templars. They were the ones that moved the gold and the silver and the money from place to place and established the modern banking system that we know of today. The Knights Templars were replaced by the Military Order of Jesus Christ, headquartered in Tomar, Portugal. Okay? By 1433, there's an apostolic edict. The Pope gives a decree. It's called the Romanus Pontifex. It's the first in a series of papal bulls issued during the 15th century that regulated Christian expansion. The purpose was for Prince Henry to go on purpose with his men at arms to those lands that are held by them and guide his army against them. This is not a benign commercial trading venture. These are armies, armed people, intended to make war under the banner of the said order against Moors and other enemies of the faith, to take the exclusive jurisdiction over Guinea, a land that did not belong to them, that was occupied by our ancestors. Infant Henrique invoked the rhetoric of a just war so as to solicit the papal patronage. Okay? By 1434, the Portuguese had gradually distinguished Africa, meaning North Africa above the Sahara, from Guinea, the land of the blacks below the Sahara. In contrast to the land of the Moors, Guinea, the land of the blacks, represented the more fertile region. Eventually, the Portuguese rendered geographical dissimilarities into customary and ultimately juridical distinctions, separating Moors from blackamoors. So they said, depending on where you live, and what you look like, you belong to this jurisdiction or that jurisdiction. And because the Pope says that he is the representative of Jesus Christ on earth, therefore he has the dominion and he has jurisdiction over all jurisdictions because he says so. Wow. Now watch this, okay? The funds appropriated from that military order of Jesus Christ located in Tomar, Portugal, largely financed the first Atlantic voyages along the western coast of Africa that Henry began to promote in the mid-1420s because he learned about it when he captured this city right here, Ceuta. When he captured that city, he learned all the information about what was going on down here. So you can see 1418, they get this far. They get this far. They get this far by 1443. They get this far, 1445. They get to our Balanta homeland. That's my homeland, Vanessa's homeland. I understand my brother Cam Howard is in the audience. He's Balanta. They get to our homeland between 1446 and 1456. Not because they were out willy-nilly exploring and just trying to sail the ocean to see what is out there. No, these are military expeditions designed to what? Find the gold and the source of the slaves. It was all financed by this military order of Jesus Christ because the Pope said so. Now, I'm going to skip this part. We're going to go here. During these voyages, Portuguese King Dom Afonso V, right, commissioned, right, Gomes Azarara to write the chronicle of the discovery and conquest of Guinea. So a royal historian is sent on these expeditions to make a firsthand eyewitness account of what happens. Okay? And he writes that one of the ship commanders brought with him an armed caravel intent on capturing some of the people of this country. By their own eyewitness accounts, this is not a trade mission. This is a military expedition. Okay? After they took their first prisoners, they traded and took an additional 10 prisoners. Gonzalez exchanged his 2 captives that were Moors for 10 blacks, male and female, from various countries. Though the Portuguese captured both Moors and the Black Moors, they had already started distinguishing between sovereign Moorish subjects and those Moors, Negroes, and blacks that they could legitimately enslave. The Portuguese introduced a taxonomy that distinguished Moors from blackamoors, infidels from pagans, and Africans from blacks, sovereign from sovereignless subjects, free persons from slaves. Okay? Here is Gomes Azarara's account of the Portuguese first arrival in the land of Guinea. Now, these caravels, these armed military ships, having passed by the land of Sahara, as hath been said, came in sight of the 2 palm trees that Dinis Diaz had met with before, by which they understood that they were at the beginning of the land of the Negroes. Now, the people of this green land are wholly black, and hence this is called the land of the Negroes, or land of Guinea. Whereas also the men and women thereof are called Guineas, as if we're to say black men. And as soon as they reached the land, Stefan Afonso leapt out and 5 others with him, and they proceeded in the manner that the others had suggested. And while they were going thus concealed, even until they neared the hut, they saw come out of it a Negro boy, stark naked, with a spear in his hand. Him they seized at once, and coming up close to this hut, they lighted upon a girl, his sister, who was about 8 years old. Right then and there, by their own eyewitness account, by the royal historian of Portugal, writing for the military order of Jesus Christ, the first contact, they kidnap a boy and a girl. In the name of their God, Jesus Christ. Because the Pope said it was legal to do so. Okay? By 1446, 55 caravels, military ships, had voyaged down the west coast. Okay? 55 different military expeditions. Okay? In order that these ships might have some cargo on their outward voyage. They bargained in such a way that he had 51 guineas brought to the caravel in exchange for whom 18 Moors were given. So these Portuguese, they would capture the Moors. The Moors would say, wait, right? If you let us go free, we'll give you some guineas. For everyone that you let free, we'll give you 5, 10 black guineas. That's how this thing started. Finally, okay, I'm going to skip this. I want to get to this and then we'll pause and take a break. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the Dum Diversas, declaring total war against the people in the land of Guinea. The document stated, "We grant to you full and free power through the apostolic authority by this edict to invade, conquer, fight, subjugate the Saracens." That was a word that they used back then to mean people of the Muslim faith, and pagans. That was the word they used to mean anybody who's not Christian, and other infidels and other enemies of Christ. And wherever there are established their kingdoms, their duchies, their royal palaces, their principalities, their cities, their dominions, their lands, their places, their estates, their camps, and any other possession, mobile and immobile, all the goods that you can find there. Okay? All of these, right? We grant possessions of the king or prince of the kings or princes, and to lead their persons, their people, in perpetual servitude, and to appropriate their realms, duchies, royal palaces, principalities, and other dominions, possessions, and goods of this kind to you and your use and your successors, the kings of Portugal. Literally, this document is a declaration of war, not a declaration of trade. It says to invade, conquer, fight, subjugate, take all their possessions, mobile and immovable. That means the stuff that's under the ground. When you see resource extraction in Africa today, when they take the lithium, the cobalt, all those things in the ground, these resource wars, it is because of this degree still. We give you the authority to go and take it. Perpetual servitude, meaning this is never to end. Finally, okay, I'm going to skip this because it's available. You can all read it. I'm going to skip this. I just want to get to the part. These are the ships that came. Okay, you have this. This is the last part, then we'll stop for a break. The Dum Diversas Apostolic Edict was followed up with monopoly war contracts known as Asientos that were variously granted by the Catholic Church to private merchants from 1518 to 1595, to Portugal again from 1595 to 1640, to the Genoese, those are the Italians, from 1662 to 1671, to the Dutch and the Portuguese from 1671 to 1701, to France from 1701 to 1713, to the British, which included her 13 colonies in America from 1713 to 1750, and finally to the Spanish from 1765 to 1779. What these contracts said was that whoever held the contract had the exclusive right to engage in the war trafficking of prisoners of war. And whoever held the contract, the profits from this trafficking, whatever you can take, gold, salt, ebony, people, 50% had to go to the Catholic Church, and the country holding the contract could keep the other 50%, which means that throughout the entire time, the single largest profiteer of this war is the Catholic Church, because regardless of who held the contract, they always got 50% of the profit. The United States officially entered the Dum Diversas War when New Hampshire became the 9th of 13 British colonies to ratify the United States Constitution, which prohibited Congress from outlawing the trafficking of African prisoners of war for 20 years. The Constitution literally said, we will engage in this war for 20 years, and then we will abolish it. Okay? This is what they didn't tell us. This is how the whole thing started. That means every African that captured was a prisoner of this Dum Diversas war. Let's stop right there, right? Because it's a little bit after the top of the hour. See if we have any comments, questions, reactions. How do you feel about this information, right?